Michael Carano with RBP Chemical Technology and chairman of the IPC Thought Leadership Program. This is newly created program by IPC was in part created because of IPC's strategic vision for the electronics industry to provide leadership and thought processes and programs to further enhance the competitiveness of the electronics industry. To achieve this goal, IPC has retained several experts in the industry from a variety of backgrounds, and you're being introduced to one today, Mr. Roger Franz. Before I introduce Roger and ask him a few questions, this program will cover various topics from competition, technology and innovation, environmental health and safety, and of course, workforce development. With me today is Roger Franz. Roger is a noted expert in the industry, and he's been providing leadership and thought leadership for a number of years. His main interest and background is in the area of chemical and material aspects of electronics. Recently, he had worked with the product environmental compliance specialties, and he has broader interest in the evolution of electronics products and R&D, bringing new components and applications to the market. So welcome, Roger.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So Roger, tell us a little bit about what you do with your company and what you've been doing for the last few years.
Sure, I can start with the present time. I'm actually in corporate IT, where I manage a system, or actually a series of systems managing product environmental compliance. So what that means is restriction of hazardous substances, the REACH directive, Proposition 65 in California. There's a whole long list of regulations. They all have to do with substances in electronics. So related to substances, I have a great interest in, what are things made of? I remember being a kid and saying, why is a concrete hard and it hurts my knee when I fall on it? Why is a tree a little softer yet it grows tall? So, putting materials technology and chemistry together is really my passion. I've been in the electronics industry for quite a number of years, got a good training back at Motorola. And if you think of the evolution of what electronics has done for us, it's pretty astounding. I mean, for simple, an old tube radio, which I used to play with, to space flights and the things we do now with cell phones. It's pretty amazing. So between the materials and the way these electronics products perform today, that's really my wheelhouse.
So obviously this is a great interest to you. So let's elaborate on that a bit. Thinking more about this issue, what are the consequences, good or bad, if we as an industry don't tackle these environmental issues, particularly on materials, hazardous substances, et cetera, especially since the electronics industry is a $2.4 trillion industry, employing hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. And even with that, it makes our lives technically much better. So, but there's also a downside with everything that can be done better. So give us a little bit of background on what you think this is, where this is going and what needs to be done moving forward.
Well, as I hope to put into my first presentation, for the TLP itself, we have a lot of driving forces based on the history of electronics. We used to use anything we could, didn't care where it went to at the end of life. That has all changed. And the arrows that are pushing us forward are now leading backwards to a circular economy. That has been around for quite a number of years. The European Commission has now tagged it with circular economy. It's now the new buzzword. Sustainability is a new buzzword, but it's not really new. We've been doing this for years. We just haven't really picked it up and used it across the board. There's been a little niches of success here and there, but as an industry, we are both pushers of change. The electronics industry has changed our lives, mostly for the better, but along with that brings problems. We are running out of certain critical metals. We have to deal with recycling of products at end of life to avoid pollution. So I think all of these are coming together, and electronics is at the nexus of our ability to go to the future, to have an energy efficient future with less pollution, more features for everybody across the world, and to level the playing field. Electronics is a great place to be. It's in the center of all these things that are happening.
Well put, Roger. And with that said, I mean, if you had the opportunity to tell, if you were in front of government officials in our nation's capital, or even various statewide locations. So many of them don't understand the importance of electronics in terms of the technology and what it brings. Many times they don't see what a circuit board is because it's buried within
Mhm.
the unit that they see. But if you had a chance to be in front of them in either Washington, D.C. or in your state, local governments, what would you tell them? What's the one thing that they could be doing better to enhance the growth of the electronics industry, besides, the fact that it creates better paying jobs and makes our lives better?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't consider myself to be the spokesman for government relations. My focus is materials, but what I would tell them, they need to understand a little bit about the technical content of electronics. What goes into it and where does it go? If they had at least a minimal big picture understanding, they would be able to help us and we would help them comply better with regulations. So I think a little bit of, the basic chemistry, what is inside your computer? Name some things. Have you heard of lead, tin, gold, copper? What do they mean to you? Coins are made out of copper. Tin cans are made out of steel with a certain coating. I would try to relate the technical content of electronics to their everyday lives and show how we need to work together to improve not only the regulations and make them more reasonable, but to get ahead of the regulations so they don't have to be forced upon the industry.
And that's another point that I would commonly hear, and I'm part of an industry that's in the chemical supply side. We develop processes used to manufacture semiconductors, circuit boards, et cetera. And there's a number of concerns with the science that not necessarily supports what the regulatory agencies want to do. And if less than 2% of the world's lead is used in electronics, yes, okay, lead's a bad actor, but in retrospect, 98% of lead is used elsewhere. So what can be your thoughts on TSCA reform? That's something that I'm always questioning and having issues with. Do you have any thoughts on TSCA reform? I'm not to say we should not have it, or we shouldn't have TSCA because that's important, but looking at the concerns that maybe can stifle innovation related to these TSCA.
Well, I'm not frankly your best spokesman for TSCA. Most of my life has been directed by the European Commission and the
Okay.
European Chemicals Agency. I'm a little bit surprised that TSCA is now kind of woken up and is now doing something about electronics. Maybe it was kind of blindsided us, frankly.
Hmm.
But to me, to follow the pattern of the European model is maybe something we should tell them about. They have a more open, it's a transparent process. Not that we can change anything because the regulations are the regulations, but there is input. I'm currently working now on extending the exemption for lead and high temperature solder that electronics needs in very
Okay.
specific small amounts. So if anything, I would try to get the large governments together to understand best practices. It's not just the United States, it's not just the EU, it's not just China. Across the globe, it's one small globe. That's the message I would try to bring. Best
Well,
practices across regulatory requirements.
that's great, and I wish you continued success in putting that in front of our leaders, because this is important, as we know. Innovation is critical for the electronics industry going forward. Roger, if you have any final thoughts on our comments you'd like to share on your view of the industry or some of the other areas that you cover.
Well, again, I'm not the government relations guy. I am really more the materials content guy, but I think the more we wake up and synergize our efforts to use common materials, simpler materials. One of the pieces I hope to write would be about carbon-based electronics. Carbon is everywhere. It's not rare, it's not critical. If we can make novel devices using very simple materials like carbon, like commonly available ceramics that are around, easily obtained and reduced and recycled. That is my vision of the future. It's not just to continue, doing something and then finding 10 years later, I shouldn't have designed that in because now it's regulated or hazardous. We need to get ahead of the curve, design benign products up front, and think about their end of life at the end. So we have, as I said before, a circular economy, something that's sustainable and helps our future.
Very good, Roger. That's extremely interesting, and I think this is a great plan going forward. We look forward to your continued contributions through the Thought Leadership Program. And again, thank you for your comments and participation today.
Glad to be part of this team, Mike. Appreciate your time. We'll be in touch. Thank you.